a writer, a scientist, a philosopher, and a politician, all one man, Benjamin Franklin. And stay tuned till the end to see how Benjamin Franklin saved America during the Revolutionary War. Benjamin Franklin was born on January 17, 1706, in Boston, Massachusetts, to a family of 16 kids, being the second youngest after his sister Jane. Boston at the time had a population of about 7,000, was 76 years old, and the largest city in America. Franklin was born into a very religious culture, the main religion being Puritan Christianity. Boston was a bustling marketplace filled with shops and had one of the largest boat ports in America. Franklin's childhood was full of playing outside with his friends, swimming, and reading. At the age of 11 years old, he observed that by increasing the volume of his hands and feet, he could push more water and swim faster. He took 2 wooden pallets and cut out holes for his thumbs and used those to swim. Thus, he invented the earliest version of swimming fins. As a young boy, Franklin would excel at school, going to the Boston Latin School and rose to the top of his class. He was good at writing but failed in math. After just 2 years of school, Franklin would drop out and go work for his dad at a candle and soap shop. Franklin did not enjoy working at his dad's candle shop, and after just 2 years of working with him, his dad decided to find Ben an apprenticeship. It was common for boys to get out of school and become apprentices in trades like leatherworking, carpentry, and blacksmithing. At the age of 12, Ben Franklin would become an apprentice to his brother James Franklin at a printing press. James Franklin would bounce around a few different newspapers before starting his own called The Courant. The Courant was notable for being the first newspaper in America to not be published by authority. It often went against the grain and challenged the establishment. This style of writing appealed to Ben, as he had a bit of a rebellious nature. Ben Franklin learned about the process of making a newspaper, the machinery involved, and got a feel for the printing business. Being around printers and writers and reading many books and publications of the time, Franklin was eager to publish writings of his own. However, his brother James wouldn't let him. Franklin went behind his brother's back and created the now famous Silence Dogood letters. Silence Dogood was a pseudonym or fictitious name for a middle-aged widowed woman, and Franklin would write from her perspective and mailed them in. In total, 14 letters were released that gained popularity and boosted the Courant's success. Sick of working for his brother at the Courant, at 17, Franklin ran away from home. Exhausted, hungry, and completely alone, he stepped off the boat into Philadelphia with a few coins and nothing to his name. He bought 3 bread rolls, dirty, awkward, and unsure of what came next. But he quickly found work with one of the printers in town, Samuel Keimer. Franklin would work at Keimer's printing shop and made lots of new friends. One day while he was working, a man named Governor Keith walked through the door looking for Franklin. He told Franklin that he had an interest in helping him start his own printing shop and told him that he'd sponsor Franklin to go to London, pick up supplies, and come back to Philadelphia. So, a few months later, Franklin set sail to London with his friend James Rouse. When they arrived in London, Franklin learned that Governor Keith lied to him and had no money for him. Franklin took the news surprisingly well and decided to make some of his own money since he was trapped in London, and found a job at a nearby printing shop. While Franklin was working and saving money, his friend James Ralph had no job and was constantly borrowing from Franklin. They ended up falling out and breaking off their friendship. Franklin learned a valuable lesson from James Rouse, that people like him, dreamers who wish they were something but never worked towards their dream, were not beneficial to have around as friends. A year later, still in London, Franklin found a new job at a printing press. While his coworkers would go to the pub house often and spend money on beer, Franklin would be frugal with his money and didn't buy beer, instead buying cheaper things like bread and water. After 2 years of being in London, Franklin decided to return to America. With no place to work, Franklin went back to Samuel Keimer's printing shop. Ambitious and restless, Franklin was eager to go out on his own. The only problem was he didn't have enough money, so he worked for Keimer for 2 more years, honing his skills and saving up until, at the age of 22, Franklin opened his own printing shop. One day, Franklin got an order from the Quakers to print 178 pages of their history. Franklin worked from before anyone was awake till after everyone was home. This industriousness impressed the shopkeepers around him. Public image is something that Franklin would perfect throughout his life, not only being hardworking, but appearing hardworking. Franklin's old boss, Samuel Keimer's newspaper, was going out of business, so, reluctantly, he sold his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, to Ben Franklin. Now Franklin had a newspaper and a printing press, so he could write and sell his own papers. What made Franklin's writing stand out from the rest was his clever use of humor and entertainment. Nowhere is that more evident than in Poor Richard's Almanac. While almanacs typically included calendars, weather information, and other useful information, Franklin's version was anything but ordinary. Under the persona of Richard Saunders, he filled its pages with stories as well as proverbs like "a penny saved is a penny earned," and "early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." It wasn't just useful, it was funny and deeply relatable. Poor Richard's Almanac would become the most popular almanac in America, selling over 250,000 copies through its 25-year run. While building his newspaper and printing business, Franklin would form a group of curious young people called the Junto. They would meet together every week to discuss books, politics, business, philosophy, and many other things. The goal of the Junto was for mutual improvement of themselves and their community and learning from each other. Franklin cared about lifting up his community and doing public good, and he would, with the help of the Junto, form many public services, one of which was a subscription-based library, and the first of its kind in America. The way it got started was when Franklin suggested to the Junto that everyone bring their books to meetings so they could share. He decided to expand this to the public and formed the Library Company of Philadelphia. He pooled the Junto's money together to buy a collection of books and put the books in a library, and anyone, in or out of the group, that paid a yearly subscription could borrow these books. At the age of 42, Ben Franklin would retire from printing and move on to science. Since he didn't have any formal education in science or math, Franklin was driven not by knowledge, but curiosity. Franklin believed lightning and electricity were the same thing, and to test this, he conducted his famous kite experiment, where he literally caught lightning out of the sky. This led to his invention of the lightning rod, which saved many buildings from lightning fires. He became a world-renowned scientist and inventor, also creating bifocal glasses, the Franklin stove, and the glass harmonica. While pursuing scientific work, Franklin held numerous political positions, starting as clerk of the Pennsylvania Assembly and becoming a member 25 years later. At the Assembly, he often passed time playing magic squares during debates to avoid boredom. Tensions were rising between the French and British over territorial expansion and what would become the French and Indian War. Because of this, Franklin published The Join or Die Snake, saying that the colonies needed to unite as one to be stronger. He proposed his plan of union at Albany in front of representatives of the colonies, but was rejected. Despite this, Franklin helped lay down the groundwork for united colonies. In 1757, Ben Franklin was sent by the Assembly to London, acting as an agent and lobbyist for the Pennsylvania Assembly. While Franklin was immersed in politics, in London, the French and Indian War was still going on in the colonies, and the British needed more money for the war, so they put a tax on the colonies called the Stamp Act that taxed paper goods in America. Many in the colonies thought the tax was unfair, but Franklin wanted to keep the peace with the British, so he didn't push too hard against the Stamp Act. Because Franklin hadn't fully opposed the Stamp Act, his reputation in the colonies took a hit. A few months later, changing his mind, mostly from outside pressure, Franklin met with members in the British Parliament with the goal to repeal the Stamp Act. Parliament hounded him with question after question about how repealing the bill might work, but Franklin stood his ground and answered all the questions thrown his way and kept calm and collected. A month after the meetings, the Stamp Act was repealed, in part because of pressure from Franklin. After this, Franklin's reputation was restored as someone who was looking out for colonial interests. In 1767, Britain passed the Townshend Acts, placing taxes on goods like tea, glass, and paper. Protests broke out, and British troops were sent to Boston to keep order. Franklin, still in London, hoped for a unified British-American empire. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving the East India Company control over tea sales. That December, the Sons of Liberty dumped the tea into the Boston Harbor. Franklin didn't support the Boston Tea Party and urged the colonies to make peace with the British, but Britain responded with the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port and tightening control. Franklin's faith in reconciliation began to crack. In 1775, British troops marched to Lexington to arrest leaders of the Boston Tea Party, John Hancock and Sam Adams. Paul Revere and others warned the British are coming, and 70 colonial soldiers cut them off. They had a standoff until someone fired, and a skirmish ensued in what became the Battle of Lexington and Concord. In response to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the colonies held the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia, and they appointed Ben Franklin as one of around 50 delegates, and right on time, as Franklin had barely gotten back from London. The goal of the Congress was to protect themselves with an army and act as the governing body of the colonies. After over a year of meetings, on July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress finally voted for independence. In preparation for this decision, the Congress created a committee to write a Declaration of Independence, with Ben Franklin a part of it. Thomas Jefferson wrote a majority of the Declaration and ran it through Franklin, who made key edits like changing, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal," to, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." On July 4th, 1776, America would send the Declaration of Independence to the British and officially declare themselves an independent nation. While they were now independent, the Revolutionary War had just begun, and America was in desperate need of troops and supplies. Continental Congress met and decided to send a team of people, with Ben Franklin as their leader, to Paris to secure supplies and an alliance. Franklin was the perfect pick because he was famous in France for his electricity experiments and was a master negotiator. When Franklin arrived, he set out to make a formal French and American alliance. He met with French leaders to negotiate an alliance but had little success. He was, however, able to secretly ship supplies to America. Everything changed in late 1777 when the Americans defeated the British in the Battle of Saratoga, which was a major victory for America. Franklin used this, along with France and Britain's long-standing rivalry, as leverage, and 4 months later, the Treaty of Alliance was signed. This was a major victory for America. After a series of battles with French supplies, troops, and naval support, America went on to officially win the Revolutionary War in 1783, and Franklin would negotiate a treaty between Britain and America. Franklin was a lifelong learner, curious, practical, and always evolving. He didn't just learn from his own mistakes, but from others around him. He was a jack of all trades, thriving in writing, business, science, and politics. Benjamin Franklin wasn't just a founding father, he was one of the most influential minds in American history. In many ways, he perfectly embodied the American spirit, a blend of ingenuity, resilience, and the belief that anyone, regardless of their beginnings, could shape their own destiny and contribute to the greater good. Franklin's life story serves as a testament to the power of self-reinvention and the enduring pursuit of freedom and progress. The whole goal of this video was to get people interested in Ben Franklin and American history. If you want to learn more, I'd highly recommend Walter Isaacson's biography on Ben Franklin, as it was the main resource I used for my research and a very good book.